these just, oh yeah, they're automatic. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this parallel session on partnerships. We have 5 great presentations coming up on some really great examples of partnerships in global health. My name is Lara Pandya. I'm a Senior Strategic Partnerships Officer at EDCTP, and I will be co-chairing this session together with Richard.
Thank you. Thanks, Lara. Good morning and welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining our session. I think we just get started about partnership. I don't know if we were at the last session, but it was clear we need partnership to move forward. The first speaker, what we're going to do is actually the speaker will speak for about 12 minutes, and hopefully we have time to ask 1 or 2 questions before we move to the next speaker. If there's time at the end of it again, we can go back again to ask more questions. Okay, so the first speaker is Dr. Toyin Togun. He's an associate professor at the London School of Tropical Medicine, Nigeria, and MRC in the Gambia. And you have 12 minutes. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Toyin Togun, and I'm the co-director of the TB Center at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And it's a pleasure for me to present this, the output from this work that we carried out as part of our activities towards promoting equitable partnerships within the wider institutional partnership of the EDCTP, specifically investigating the barriers and challenges facing early and mid-career researchers in low and middle-income countries to attract grant funding. Recent efforts to decolonize global health have highlighted the continued existence of colonial structures in research into diseases of public health importance in low and middle-income countries in particular. Now, while research projects are inextricably linked to informing practice and policies to improve the health of the study population, the research grants for such projects play a critical role in defining not only the research priorities, but also the research leadership. As a result, majority of global health research conducted in low and middle-income countries are led by researchers from high-income countries. This has been shown unequivocally for TB, but we believe the same thing exists for HIV, malaria, and other diseases of public health importance. So a key step towards restructuring this system and adapting it to local need is what we have termed equitable leadership in global health partnerships. This requires ensuring that researchers in low and middle-income countries are given the opportunity to successfully attract grant funding in order to lead and drive their own research based on locally defined priorities. Now, why is this important to us at the EDCTP TB Center? The TB Center at the London School is a global collaborative partnerships of TB researchers and academics with multidisciplinary expertise working towards ending TB globally. And this slide shows where our faculties work on tuberculosis or conducting tuberculosis research globally. TB is a disease of poverty, largely distributed in low and middle-income countries in Africa, south of the Sahara, Southeast Asia, South America, and in high-income countries in Europe or North America, where TB occurs. It's often among the most underprivileged in society who often have the least access to healthcare. So we believe that we are ideally positioned not just to start this conversation, but actually to do something about equitable leadership within the wider institutional partnerships of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So in February of 2022, last year, we organized a multi-stakeholder participatory workshop that brought together funders and early and mid-career researchers from all over the world to identify what funder initiatives have worked in order to improve equitable leadership, to better understand the barriers that are faced by researchers, and to collectively brainstorm approaches to overcome these barriers. There was a virtual workshop attended by more than 140 participants. And we believe that this workshop and the output from this workshop will actually add to the existing literature about how to research capacity building and addressing global inequalities in global health research. So This slide is actually showing a snapshot of the participants, although only about 75% of the participants completed the questionnaire. Majority of them, the researchers, are based on working in Africa, about 57%, and 34% from Europe, and about 2/3 actually identify themselves as early or mid-career researcher, ranging from PhD research assistant to senior postdoctoral fellows. And the researchers represent diverse areas of research, including communicable and non-communicable diseases. The workshop was recorded, and the recording was transcribed verbatim. The transcript was analyzed using the deductive thematic approach based on the key research topics in order to identify the key themes from the workshop. I will now present a summary of the key themes that derived from this workshop on the barriers and challenges confronting early and mid-career researchers from low and middle-income countries, as well as strategies to mitigate these barriers, as well as recommendations provided by the participants. And I will be providing supporting quotes in order to buttress some of these points. The barriers to accessing research funding for early and mid-career researchers, mostly in low and middle-income countries, could be grouped into two main themes. First, limited individual and institutional level support, and second is the flawed funding structure for early and mid-career researchers in this context. And each of these main themes have a number of sub-themes within them. Let's look first at the limited individual and institutional level support. The participants identified lack of mentorship has been a crucial barrier towards attracting grant funding, because mentorship plays a critical role in guiding early and mid-career researchers, not only in the development of their research career path, but in formulation of research career ideas. And mentorship is a challenge not only for early career researchers who are at the start of their research, but also for mid-career researchers who are transitioning to independence. They also identify lack of mentorship as towards maintaining or building upon this independence as an obstacle, as put by this female early career researcher who said, as you are beginning, you need to work with people that can actually help to build you. Secondly, weak research institutions. It's obvious, and this will resonate very well, especially for the partnerships or the nodes of excellence that we met yesterday, that there are weak institutions within a partnership, and there might be some not so strong institutions, because some institutions have strong structures, infrastructure support, as well as providing stronger pathways for the early and mid-career researchers, including grantmanship training to secure funding. And these institutions have, this is associated with improved success rates. Training and grantmanship is not available in all institutions in low and middle income countries, and these shortcomings could have direct impact on the quality and the competitiveness of the grant applications. This female early career researcher stated that certain institutions have better applications, so it looks as if the funding is targeted for them. So for other institutions, there must be some institutional commitment towards grant application. And the third sub-theme is about networks. The fact that networks, teams, and institutional pathways for progression facilitate not only generation of ideas, but also allow for building of multidisciplinary teams and projects which funders find very attractive, and also enhance cross-pollination of skills, experience, and ideas that could facilitate improving the ability of early and mid-career researchers to conduct research. This male mid-career researcher stated that one of the key pillars of my success has been the ability to be able to link into international networks. Now, when we look at the second main theme, that is flawed funding structures for early and mid-career researchers, the participant identified that the lack of direct funding for LMIC partners is a major obstacle to the ability of early and mid-career researchers to attract funds. Few funding sources are available for early and mid-career researchers, and there are additional challenges and biases, particularly against women. Many of the large funders are known who reported not to fund LMIC partners directly, and in such situation, research partnerships will not be equitable. The representative of one of the research institutions in sub-Saharan Africa stated that we know that not all research funders are willing to fund LMIC researchers directly, which is a major challenge. A second sub-theme under the flawed funding structure is the weak capacity building. Most funders invest in health programs in low and middle income countries, and this largely benefits health, but not necessarily the capacity for knowledge generation. There's also a challenge with getting trained researchers trained and to remain within low and middle income countries. And the early and mid-career researchers also highlighted the need for funders to provide constructive feedback which will play a critical role in strengthening future applications. This, again, is supported by this quote from a male early career researcher who stated that the feedback you get from most of these donors is not really constructive enough to help improve future applications. So in terms of strategies to address these barriers, we came up with what I will describe as a multi-level strategic approach that directed at different players, including institutional reforms, the researchers, research institutions, as well as the funders. And this slide actually summarizes the strategies, some of the strategies to address this barrier. I will just highlight some of the key strategies. First is that with regard to the funders, there is the need for institutional reforms in the approaches to funding. This requires funders to develop guidance documents for equitable funding and partnerships if they do not exist. And the development of such documents should be done through consultative engagement with relevant stakeholders in order to understand the needs. From the perspective of the researchers, this is very important, and the key is about diversifying the funding streams. And researchers, particularly, early and mid-career researchers as well as senior scientists in low and middle income countries need to play a major part in lobbying the governments of the countries to increase sort of like budgetary contribution to research. EDCTP is a good example of that because it's a partnership between European and developing countries. But we know that the bulk of the contribution possibly come from the European Union. It's important that we need to play the role of advocates to lobby the governments in Africa, other low and middle income countries, to understand the importance of the return on investment so that they could increase their own contribution and we can diversify this funding stream. In TB research, for example, countries like India, Nigeria, South Africa need to increase their budgetary allocation to research and be funders of research rather than being recipients, be part of contributing even to the fund, for the pot for global health research. For research institutions in low and middle income countries, it's important to build partnerships, to strengthen partnerships. And South-South collaborations become very important because these strong and equitable research partnerships might have the potential to fill the gaps where key funders do not fund LMIC partners directly. And this is where the importance of building, and this will resonate very well with the regional nodes of excellence. And with regard to capacity building of the early and mid-career researchers, research institutions need to make provision for mentorship support through institutional platforms that will take advantage of the alumni network of these institutions, as well as volunteering of experienced researchers and the networks. So further about the capacity building by funders, the distributed funder arrangement could include ring-fenced funding for capacity building for early and mid-career researchers that will specifically address gender bias. A very good example is the Talent Grant, which was a sub-grant that we received from in the West African Network of Excellence, specifically targeted at training female early career researchers at MSc and PhD level. This will support researcher development fellowships and platforms for networking, as well as creating resource hubs that will be set up by funders to allow synergy, as well as contributing to essential skills training for grant writing and peer reviewing workshop. The research institutions should provide dedicated protected time that will allow for grant writing aimed at strategic planning. And for the researchers themselves, they need to, early and mid-career researchers must understand the importance of improved skill set. This will improve their eligibility as well as facilitate flexibility for geographical and institutional mobility. And mentorship support through institutional platforms could take advantage, as I mentioned, of alumni networks. So in conclusion, early and mid-career researchers continue to face barriers to accessing research funding, and this is the cornerstone of equitable leadership in global health. I belong to this school of thought that equitable partnership will be difficult, where only one partner provides overwhelming majority of the funds. So, and the key barriers include the lack of mentorship support, the weak network, and the poor institutional support. The existing funder initiatives could be improved, facilitating sharing of resources, promoting more of South-South collaborations and power. And this will enable us to redefine who sets research priorities. And the research institutions and the researchers themselves will also benefit from widened engagement with stakeholders. This will foster collaborations with both local and international organizations. Finally, I would like to acknowledge my colleagues that worked with me on this workshop, as well as in provision of the reports, as well as the workshop speakers and attendees, and also the various funders that participated in the workshop, and particularly the EDCTP Regional Network of Excellence. Many of the early and mid-career researchers that participated in this workshop were part of the 4 regional networks of excellence in Africa. Thank you very much for your attention.
Do we have any questions for Tony? Yes, please.
Veerle Lejon from the Institut de Recherche pour le Développement. I'm a bit surprised that language did not come up as a barrier, and I was wondering, in your workshop, were there Francophone and Lusophone researchers participating? Because I also saw that when you showed the map with the distribution of projects, they were all in Anglophone countries.
No, the map. Okay, sorry, it's not showing again. That's for the TB Center where we work. Just an example of the scope of the research project that we're on. This, I won't say only Anglophone countries. For example, in West Africa, this map essentially, of course, needs to be updated because, as I mentioned, the networks of excellence of EDCTP include both Anglophone, Francophone, and Lusophone countries, and they participated in this workshop. This is showing where the TB Center works, not where the participants come from. Okay, so this is just showing where the TB Center works globally,
yes,
not where the participants.
But you showed an analysis of the participants, and did you also take into account to analyze based on language?
No, the workshop was understandably really organized in English, and I mean, what you're saying, I agree, and I understand that language could also be a barrier from what is done, because the work is just contributing to existing knowledge about, how to enhance research capacity strengthening. Yeah.
Can we take one question?
We might have time even for another one.
Thank you. I'm Jonathan Underwood from the Welcome in London.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I know we've got several more to come today, but I would be amazed if they don't all pull in exactly the same directions as yours. Yeah. I think one thing I'd like to ask you is where you talk about the need to incentivize investment from national governments in Africa. Yeah. We, as funders, are very keen to engage on that agenda. We want to support it.
Good.
How best can we do that? And so that's a question, and then a comment on your recognition of the value in diversifying funding. From my experience, that also introduces complexity because different funders want different things.
True.
And you're then in a situation where you're being pulled in different directions with your research. So I think that's a note to selves as funders that we need to be ready to align and to support rather than expecting that of the researchers.
Good. Yes, thanks. Great question and comment. The key approach, and in practical terms how to do it from the recommendations from the workshop, essentially is for the researchers in low and middle income countries, both not only early and mid-career researchers, but also senior researchers, to actually take the lead in lobbying the governments. This becomes part of systemic advocacy for us to lobby the national government in our various countries through existing academic institutions in the country, through existing professional associations in the low and middle income countries, for the governments to see the importance or the return of investment in research. When this is driven by the researchers in low and middle income countries, they say, then buy-in becomes easy with support from funders from Europe, because it's important to diversify funding stream. We know about donor fatigue, which could almost inevitably will set in. But when we have diversified funding stream with increased contribution from the countries in low and middle income countries themselves, that will go a long way in ensuring that the partnership is equitable to some sense, and will actually promote the fact that leadership can be equitable. Since the funding plays a major role in defining not only the priorities but also the leadership of research projects. Yeah.
Can I seize the opportunity to ask a question?
Yeah.
Tony, equity to have equity, I think you mentioned the fact that there has to be contributions from both parties,
True.
particularly to ensure long-term sustainability.
Yeah.
One of the issues, I see it in Nigeria, and I work with Nigeria Medical Research Council, is that the government doesn't actually see what they benefit from funding research because they don't generate data for government to use. So why should they put money there?
Yeah.
How can that, what kind of advocacy do you need to change that perception that we're not getting any returns for our money?
Yeah, I mean,
So there's no return on investment.
yes.
And it's vice versa. And then researchers say the government doesn't give them money to do research. So how do you how do you do with that? Except you change that, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah, that's why I think a system of advocacy led by the researchers themselves and for the researchers to actually
data.
understand. That is true. But the researchers in low and middle income countries are doing studies, often in collaboration with institutions in high income countries. By promoting more of South-South collaborations, both within countries or within sub-regions, addressing locally defined and based on locally defined priorities, we might be able to convince governments to increase, or for them to see the return on investment by generating reliable data and engaging. Often researchers like to work in silos. We'll rather collaborate with partners in the north than those in our sub-region. We need to also step up engagement with government. You know, that is something that we are trying to do from the collaborative partnerships in West Africa by working closely with the West African Health Organization, which is the health policy arm, and the WAHO have important leverage with the national governments across West Africa. So that is one way. Also for the researchers to also work closely with the regional WHO offices like WHO Afro. WHO Afro, they have important leverage over the national governments. Those are some key practical steps that researchers can actually engage more with the governments.
Thank you. Okay, one last question.
Yeah, maybe one quick one.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I wanted to express that we now have these two common institutions, the WHO Afro and the CDC Africa.
Yeah.
So those are the key areas where our government leaders or the decision makers, where money should go, should be pinned. And we need to use those to make a decision. I believe that researchers cannot just push the agenda. We've been pushing the agenda for so many years and nothing is happening. So I think those two organizations have really to think of how to push this forward. Yeah. And that was then. This is now. We now have return investments on the research that we're doing. We have the digital innovations and everything else. So I think it is possible this time forward. Thank you.
Absolutely, I agree. And not just the WHO, Afro, and Africa CDC, but even the sub-regional governments, the West African Economic Community of West African States, the East African equivalent in East Africa, South Africa, working with those regional governments, the researchers within the regions need to have the buy-in from the sub-regional governments too. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I think just that was also quite useful to see how that also is quite complementary to, was it last year, Maggie, the UK CDR Essence guidelines, the good practice document that came out on 4 approaches to supporting equitable research partnerships. So might be good to connect and see how best to take that forward. So our next speaker is Augustin Martin Lasanta from DSW in Belgium. And Augustin will be presenting on introducing a priority review voucher in the EU to encourage neglected disease product development. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for being here today. My name is Agustin. I work for DSW. We're a global health NGO. I'm responsible, together with 2 colleagues in the Brussels office, to advocate for improving the policies and increasing the investments that goes into research and development for neglected infectious disease products. And this is why we are interested in the priority review voucher as a potential mechanism that could support that effort in the EU. So just a bit of a background on why we're looking into this and how we are looking into this. We've seen that the pipeline of products in this field has increased in the recent years, thanks in no small measure to the efforts of EDCTP and other funders. So we have to start thinking about what happens with those promising products in the pipeline. How do we make sure that there is funding for that costly, still with high attrition, clinical research? And what kind of mechanisms exist to support product registration and distribution in priority countries at affordable prices. The United States created such a mechanism in 2007. It was originally focused on tropical diseases, which include TB, and has contributed to important innovations in the field, as the first vaccine against dengue, first drug for TB into 40 years, first oral treatment for sleeping sickness, and others. So we believe a similar program in the EU could also be interesting and have some positive effects. The way we're looking into this is that we conducted a literature review, in particular of empirical studies on the PRV, and there are not that many, unfortunately, in particular for the tropical disease program. We also conduct great literature looking at publications and theories about ways to improve the priority review voucher or other incentives that could complement or to some extent replace the program. But we also looked at and that's really what DSW led, the EU's current legal, institutional, political, and financial ecosystem since the pandemic, which, as you may imagine, has changed quite significantly. We took inspiration in particular on a paper published by David Ridley and Alfonso Calles in 2010 that already theorized introducing a priority review voucher in the EU. So we look at that paper and try to revisit it in light of the new policy developments in the EU. On top of that, since there's very little empirical evidence, as mentioned, we interviewed a number of stakeholders, product development, partnerships, large and small pharma companies, biotech and global health NGOs, to understand the usefulness of this mechanism first, but also the desired features for the EU model and some of the lessons learned as well in the United States. And there is an economic model in estimating the commercial value of the EU PRV program, which is a research paper authored by David Ridley that is forthcoming. So a quick reminder of what the PRV is, for those that may not know. It's an incentive, a pull incentive that basically rewards companies that develop and register a product in the FDA for a neglected infectious disease with a tradable right, a voucher that they can use to get accelerated assessment of another product, any product, typically a blockbuster product, and this is the way they recuperate their investment. That right can be sold as well to companies, which is the usual practice. So product development in this field is driven by PDPs and small, medium-sized companies, not-for-profit often. So they don't have large portfolios. What they do is they sell that right of accelerated assessment to large pharmaceutical companies. And in the United States, the value of vouchers have changed significantly. Originally, it was around $300 million US. Now it's around 100 million on average, which is what we expect the EU voucher to be worth. With one important difference: in the US, there are 3 priority review voucher programs, and of course that meant that that expanded the number of vouchers in the system, and that had a negative impact on the value of vouchers because the value is fixed by the market. So these are the features of the EU's voucher. For those familiar with the US program, you will probably guess, or you will have figured out already, that is very, very similar. One of the reasons we propose a similar mechanism is that we want both voucher programs to be complementary, meaning that companies could potentially get 2 vouchers per one innovation. Of course, they will have to register in the FDA and potentially in the EMA, depending on the final tweaks of the proposal. But that would basically double the reward, and we believe after a lot of stakeholder consultations that the 200 million return on investment it's really a critical threshold for some technologies, so that would make a big difference. It's still focused on drug and vaccines like the American program. The disease scope is also fairly aligned. We're exploring potentially including a few diseases that are in the emerging infectious disease PRV program, like chikungunya, which we believe are still relevant for LMICs and that suffer from a significant market failure as well. And we've tried to address some of the shortcomings of the American program, in particular on 2 areas. One is the novelty requirement, meaning we really want these incentives to be about innovation. And in the United States, there was a bit of gaming, and some companies basically register all drugs that have been used for many years to treat tropical diseases and register in the FDA in order to get those PRVs. So we don't want this game in the European Union. So we're suggesting that the active ingredient or the active ingredient of the drug, in case of combination therapies, at least one active ingredient, must not have been registered for human use in any WHO-listed authority or stringent regulatory authority. For 2 years. This 2-year period is to give also a little bit of time for those that may want to introduce their product in the United States and get that voucher as well. And we are also trying to improve the accessibility requirements. So we are requiring an access plan. We are suggesting that an access plan is required. The enforceability of that access plan is still problematic because the EMA does not have capacities to do so. Thankfully, EDCTP 3 funding requires legally beneficiaries to have access and affordability plans. So we believe that in the case of the EU program, there would be less risk of those products sitting on a shelf after receiving a PRB. And we also have the EU Medicines for All mechanism, which is the mechanism that allows the European Medicines Agency to provide a scientific opinion on the regulatory qualities of a product, primarily for outside of the EU market. That has facilitated the product registration in priority countries, but again, it doesn't guarantee the access nor the affordability of that product. So it's still an imperfect mechanism in the EU in that regard. And then we estimate that the value would be around 100 million, which is a conservative economic modeling based on the time gains in the EU. So the EMA is slightly less performing than the FDA, which is good for the value of the voucher. It takes so accelerated assessment in the EMA saves you 6 months on average. But of course, the EU market is smaller than the US market, and it's also more complex because you also need to negotiate price and reimbursement with each of the member states. That would still be the case, but there is a proposal to reform pricing and reimbursement decisions in the EU next year, so it could be a little bit streamlined. And we also try to account in the research paper about the fact that if some member states, in particular the largest ones like France, Germany, Spain, or Italy, would additionally grant accelerated pricing and reimbursement for companies redeeming vouchers, and that would basically double the value. So instead of 100 million, we believe it would be worth at least 200 million each voucher. And we have proposed, as is the case in the United States system, some fees to offset the cost, additional cost in the EMA for having to do those accelerated assessments that otherwise would not have happened. We believe that the 1 million fee we are proposing would largely offset the cost because the average regulatory the fee for active regulatory review is around 300,000 euros. So it's 3 times more or less the cost. And there's, of course, discounts and waivers for SMEs and non-profits. This is how the PRB would sit in the EU's funding ecosystem for global health, which is a bit of a tenuous term. We look at the instruments that fund research, but also that support product registration and distribution for neglected disease products. Of course, EDCTP is the main vehicle, but there's also Horizon Europe, so calls for proposals launched through the Research Framework Program. ZEPI, because as mentioned, we are also looking at in certain cases at emerging infectious disease products like chikungunya, which is primarily funded by the EU through the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. Then we have at registration level the EU Medicines for All that I mentioned. The PRBs will be fully complementary with this mechanism, and in fact we are encouraging companies to also follow that regulatory pathway. And then of course the post-approval manufacturing distribution, which is done primarily supporting health systems strengthening in LMICs and also through global multilaterals like Gavi, Global Fund, and so on. So in conclusions, we estimate that the PRB program could do some good things in the European Union. Primarily, it would inject significant additional private funding into the R&D ecosystem of the EU, and it is important to emphasize the private element of it, because the program is self-financing, it doesn't require any sort of subsidy, and that makes it significantly attractive in the EU, where, as you may know, or for those that know something about the EU, it's the budget is very, very constrained, and it's subject to many vetoes by different actors. It would also support projects funded by the EDCTP, although not necessarily exclusively as per our proposal, in reaching that milestone in product development. And we know there are many promising candidates already in phase 3, and other products that have been just pre-qualified or recently launched that will still require additional funding to conduct more clinical research, implementation research, etc. So this mechanism could support all that effort and contribute overall to the EDCTP's success. It would decrease the fragmentation within the EU's funding ecosystem by filling one critical gap in the funding ecosystem that we just saw. And of course, it would contribute to realizing the EU's commitment and objectives in global health. The EU adopted a global health strategy on November last year that explicitly commit the European Union to support tackling poverty-related and neglected infectious diseases and deliver on the objectives of the Agenda 2030. So in short, this would help to present a more compelling investment case for late-stage product development, in particular registration and distribution of products within the scope of the EDCTP 3. However, this should not be perceived as a replacement of any existing funding, particularly not push funding, because some of the empirical research on PRV shows that it has more, it certainly is more effective at supporting late stage product development than early stage. It has no effect actually, or it hasn't shown any effect on incentivizing additional preclinical and early clinical research. And we believe also as well that this should not be considered a silver bullet at all. This should be part of a global strategy to tackle neglected diseases. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Agustin. Other, oh, I see, yes. Jutta.
Thank you very much. Very interesting, of course. By when is this mechanism available in Europe? And what about the mechanism on transferable patent extensions, which was a second option, if I remember correctly?
Yes. So, well, our job is to try to persuade European Union decision makers that they introduce the priority review vouchers. So one of the reasons we've chosen this mechanism is that this week and next week, the European Parliament is finalizing its position on the new pharmaceutical strategy for the EU, which has a big component on devising new incentives for R&D in areas of unmet medical need. The definition of unmet medical need is still being discussed, but tropical diseases are not the priority. One of the priority areas is antimicrobials. The other is orphan and pediatrics. So we hope, that's part of what we're doing now, and I just came from meetings in Brussels with a lot of the negotiators, that Parliament will consider introducing this mechanism for neglected infectious diseases as proposed. Next year we'll go to the Council, so ministers of health will discuss that proposal, and hopefully by the end of next year we will have an agreement and we'll see if we've been successful in these legislative negotiations. Of course, that doesn't mean we cannot explore other legislative avenues, and we will certainly do so. In terms of the transferable exclusivity voucher that has been proposed, but for antimicrobials, we believe, and there's a proposal from the Duke University actually of a transferable exclusivity voucher for neglected infectious diseases. Unfortunately, we believe that this would be too radical for the EU, because the impact that this has on a delay in generic competitors is significant. And also the reward is around $1 billion. So this could also raise concerns about a disproportionate type of reward for this kind of products. So we're doing a larger study looking at other incentives that include looking at transferable exclusivity patents or data market exclusivities, but this is not our preferred option. And in fact, when we discussed the PRV with Professor David Ridley, which is one of the intellectual fathers, he told us that in 2006, the original idea in the United States was to have a transferable voucher program for patents, and it was considered too radical at the time, and the PRV was considered a more feasible mechanism. So we're hoping that maybe history will repeat in the EU.
It's a very interesting mechanism. Good to hear the timelines as well for the future plans. Are there any other questions from any? Oh, over here, there's a gentleman. Oh, there's a microphone coming to you if you don't mind.
Thank you. The product scope does not include diagnostics?
The PRV does not include diagnostic, no.
Ardi is just here at the front here. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Augustine, for I think it's a great work of desk research and lobby work behind all this. So very well presentation. Thanks a lot. My question would be, and maybe it's a not relevant question, but so what do you expect that will happen with the PRVs in terms of prioritization of issuing them? If there would be given the rich pipeline that PDPs are having at the moment with late stage products in the pipeline, what would be expected in terms of, could there be given more than one PRV in a year, or how would that work?
So we estimate, looking at the pipeline and also the history in the United States, there would be a maximum of 2 vouchers per year. And that is also important because we wouldn't really want to overburden the EMA with too many vouchers. That is conditional to the limitation of the scope, as mentioned, because in the United States, one of the problems the voucher program have with tropical diseases is that they created 2 additional programs for rare pediatric products and emerging infectious disease products, and that flooded the system. And it also has some impacts on the FDA's capabilities. So we believe that the impact that the program would be encouraging or incentivizing the registration of at least 2 products or hopefully 2 products per year. And there's a number of candidates that we are kind of convinced that would certainly benefit from that, and the companies behind them also agree with us that if the program would be created, they will certainly be able to register the product faster because they are just there, but they don't have the financial support yet.
Thanks, Martin. Just make sure, when you say to be registered via M for all, do you consider the approval in Europe or the other one? We discussed already, but I'm still confused.
So in our proposal, we're suggesting that companies should register through the centralized authorization procedure, so go to the EMA and register it there. However, as part of these stakeholder consultations, one of the suggestions that was made by the company was to allow companies to get PRVs by only introducing EU Medicines for All mechanism, which is an interesting idea. It has one problem, I believe, which is that it would mean that the EMA and European regulators would grant accelerated assessment of a second product, the blockbuster medicine, and that's what makes it valuable, for a product reviewed by third countries, in particular regulatory authorities from low and middle income countries and WHO. That seems unlikely at present. I believe they would like to be they would like to, be the ones that grant the regulatory approval. However, it's an interesting thought, and certainly we're trying to understand if that would be feasible, because it will be better. It will diminish the administrative paperwork for companies, and those products will be, with very few exceptions like tuberculosis treatments and maybe a few other treatments, would be primarily used or exclusively used outside of the EU.
Are there any other questions?
I can ask one, actually.
You have one? Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is how would these vouchers actually translate to making the product accessible, and in terms of also pricing for those who need the drugs in low and middle income countries?
Yeah,
it doesn't seem to be related to that.
It does not automatically translate into access. That's guaranteed. So it's one of the limitations of the whole mechanism. Well, the way we are looking at this is that was something we were pretty aware at the very beginning. We had a lot of conversations about whether the EU should have enforceable mechanisms for access, but the EMA does not really have a capacity to do so, to police that. As I mentioned, EDCTP 3 has a legal requirement for organizations benefiting from it, that they need to have access and affordable plans for all the products funded by them, and we are assuming that most of the PRB beneficiaries would have received at some stage EDCTP 3 funding. So they would be legally obliged, and the Commission would be the watchdog for that, to develop those plans. Still, I think that does not mean that there will not be hiccups in the access and affordability of those products. That's why we're looking also at other incentives that could support that part better, like advanced purchase or advanced market commitments, or the EU's alignment or the support of EDCTP funded products through the Global Fund, streamlining that conversation a little bit better. But for tropical disease products, for example, we don't have a Global Fund, so we still have a question certainly there.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Augustine. That's a very interesting, great proposal. Let's see how it goes.
So it's my pleasure then to introduce the next speaker. That's Beatrice Greco from Germany. You have the floor. Thank you.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. So I'm Beatrice Greco. I'm part of the Merck Global Health Institute, and today I'm going to be presenting on behalf of the Pediatric Praziquantel Consortium. In the short 10 minutes that we have, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the status of the research and development and to develop a pediatric formulation for praziquantel to treat preschoolers against schistosomiasis. And then I will address a few elements and a few steps that we are now starting to take to translate that innovation into access and potentially impact. And I will highlight also some of the critical gaps that we're already observing. And I think that will be also linked to somehow to the conversation that just happened with the PRV and the question on access. So I won't bore you with what is schistosomiasis. I think for the last 3 days you have had a lot of description of this neglected tropical disease. This is a parasitic disease present in 78 countries with over 250 million people requiring treatment. This is primarily a disease that is very present on the African continent, although it's present also in other parts of the world. This is a disease that is contracted through the contact of freshwater bodies containing the parasite as well as its intermediate host. It leads to chronic disease that is actually being treated via a standard of care, praziquantel. Praziquantel is used to treat primarily school-aged children right now via the donation of Merck to WHO. And there's now also an increasing number of adults being treated. However, it's quite clear that to reach elimination by 2030, it's the entire population at risk that needs to be treated. And this includes also preschool-aged children. Today we have an estimate. It's just an estimate. It's probably underestimated, of about 50 million of preschoolers, so children below 5 years old that are at risk of infections with schistosomiasis. But yet they are not being treated today because there's not a suitable pediatric formulation of praziquantel. And this is also one contributor of hampering reaching elimination of schisto in the set agenda. What we have to take in account is that actually schistosomiasis in that early age segment is not just a neglected tropical disease. And here I would really advocate to even change the narrative of what we are doing. This is also and primarily a child health development challenge that is leading, and this chronic disease is actually leading to significant health impacts and issues in the development of those children. Chronic schistosomiasis infection is leading to challenges in malnutrition, leading to stunting, anemia, cognitive impairments, and also a little known fact of disturbance in the immune response to a certain number of vaccines. This is a significant burden accumulated over the years until they can start to be treated. And this is not only a public health burden, but it's also a financial burden. We've conducted an investment case with health economists, and we have identified that actually not treating preschooler children is leading to significant financial loss to countries, not only from domestic fundings, but also from international programs. And this can be in the range of up to between $200 and up to $600 million per year. This is a significant financial loss. So we are talking about a public health burden with a significant financial impact on countries. So a problem that needs to be urgently tackled. The Pediatric Praziquantel Consortium that is formed of over 10 partners coming from the private sector, non-for-profit organization, academics, endemic countries, has been formed about 10 years ago, with already the goal at the time to develop a pediatric formulation for praziquantel to reduce this burden in those preschool-age children. And not only to develop it, but to register it and to make it accessible to countries via an innovative mechanism that is stepping out from the regular donation to reach sustainability. Today, what have we achieved? Well, we have achieved the development of a product that is fitting with the target product profile intended. A small size to make it accessible for the pediatric population, allowing more precise dosing, dispersible, significant reduction of the bitterness of praziquantel, has also all the stability necessary to endure hot and humid conditions with the necessary manufacturing scale for large scaling up. We have also concluded a full clinical development program, and this conducted with endemic country partners. We've gone from test study in Tanzania to phase 1 in South Africa, phase 2 in Ivory Coast, and we conclude in 2021 with a phase 3 study in Ivory Coast and Kenya, very successfully by demonstrating a favorable safety profile and efficacy profile of the product against Mansoni and hematobium, with this improved palatability that is absolutely required. Not only have we conducted the science with our partners locally, but in fact, that partnership has allowed to strengthen the local infrastructure and also the local clinical competencies. And I have to say, and I'm not sure that I'm really authorized to say so, but I have to say that this has led to a very successful EMA inspections in Camry and the University of Félix Houphouët-Boigny quite recently. They have gone through these inspections with flying colors, and I think we have really to congratulate them for such an achievement of reaching such a level of high competencies and expertise. So kudos for them. Now, the point is, we have a product. How are we going to translate this into impact through access? Well, access is one word, but a word that is actually overshadowing a very complex framework of a series of activities and elements that have to work together to make them very successful and to reach impact. First, it comes with the definition of the model that we want to approach the accessibility. Is it a commercial, a for-profit endeavor? Is it a non-for-profit endeavor? Then the product has to be available. Well, it's easy to say. What does it mean? It means that the R&D has to be concluded successfully. It means that the manufacturing works, the forecasting, the procurement mechanism, the supply chain is working and impactful. Affordability, the pricing structure has to be in adequation with the model, either a commercial or a non-commercial model. Acceptability. The product has to be acceptable to the international health authorities, but also at national level. Beyond that, it's also the medical body and the patients. Appropriate use, of course, how best to use and how to implement those innovations at country level. This framework is also very much intertwined with incentives. We just discussed about PRVs. Well, okay, this is one incentive from the R&D aspect, but there's also the need for have the financing mechanism to make sure that the market is significantly pooled and is maintained over time. So you can see an architecture that is rather complex. Now I'm going to walk you through some of the first steps that the consortium is taking into this jungle of activities. First of all, the definition of the model. From the get-going, the consortium was very clear. We are intending to access and to provide access to this new product through a not-for-profit procurement-based access model, complementing existing donations that today are targeting a certain number of the population, but not all of them. So here it's a complement to existing donation, but it's also aiming at equitable and long-term sustainability, with building the necessary capacity locally to ensure that long-term resilience. And this is actually a model that we believe is going to be quite important also for new products in the NTD space. The second aspect in the availability is, of course, to understand the target population, but also its volume. So today we are saying that there is in the range of 50 million preschoolers below 5 years old that are at risk of schistosomiasis. By WHO guidelines, it has been advice for countries is very much to start with the 2 to 5 years old via mass drug administration and more tailored mass drug administration. The below 2 years old need to be treated via a test and treat approach, which is actually an approach that today does not exist in countries. So we are going to be focusing on this targeted population of the 2 to 5 years old initially, and this represents in the range of 26 million preschoolers. The market, if we want to call it this way, is going to be rather a public sector, a governmental-led type of approach. We've had a number of conversations with various stakeholders and countries, and this is the path toward access that makes the most sense, Ministry of Health-led type of programs. Then comes the question, okay, this is a procurement-based mechanism. So the mechanism by itself is something that we can explore and we can learn from others that have done this type of activities. However, there is one element, and the most critical element, I would say the elephant in this space, and that is the financing for purchasing NTD commodities. This is a critical gap. Without this, there's no market pooling. There's no incentive to continue. And we need to ask ourselves even hard questions. If we are not managing this, if this community is not managing this, then we need to have the hard conversation of, is it worth it to even continue investing in R&D? So we have to be very careful here. And of course, today we're having dialogues with various countries to discuss about how and by when and what are the potentials for mobilizing domestic fundings. We know that this is a long-term perspective. So meanwhile, an alternative funding mechanism is absolutely necessary. So this is really a call for action to this community to really look at this really hard and quickly. Now, availability is also about manufacturing, as I mentioned. So we have set up already a manufacturing process by which the active ingredient is being produced in China with Valiant. We have done technology transfer in Farmanguinhos in Brazil as being our first drug product manufacturer. And we are currently conducting also technology transfer in Kenya at Universal. Because at the end, the intent is very much that this product that is tailored for primarily the African market needs to be produced locally by manufacturing African organizations. Today we have already the maximum capacity of reaching 50% of those 26 million preschoolers. So today we don't see the necessity to increase even further. We need to make sure that we use that capacity at its maximum. Affordability is another pillar of access. Of course, we are following principles, pricing principles aligned with the UN SDGs to achieve universal healthcare coverage, meaning to ensure that the use of this product is not going to create any financial hardship to the users. This is very much aligned with the Pediatric Praziquantel Consortium intent of a non-for-profit approach with the aim to achieve the lowest price achievable to facilitate country engagements. And this should be free of charge for the patient at the end. Acceptability, as I mentioned, requires that international health authorities are validating the value of what we're proposing. And we have submitted our dossier to the EMA-M4All last year in November. The procedure is still ongoing, and we are expecting, hopefully, a positive scientific opinion before the end of the year. So we are in November, you can imagine more or less by when. And this should be followed by a WHO pre-qualification by early 2024. We need to then follow up by essential medicines listing and discussion with countries in terms of the requirement of national registration. Just very briefly, because I've seen that my time is up, appropriate use. We have engaged already through the ADOPT program, which is the continuation of the pediatric praziquantel from the R&D aspect into implementation research. This is a work that we're conducting with the Ministry of Health of Kenya, Ivory Coast, and Uganda, where we are already exploring together with them the best way of approaching those kids and treating those kids. This is actually a poster that is there for your review when you step out of the room. So this is again a program that is ongoing with expected data to be delivered by 2025, and hopefully the best platform identified with the Ministry of Health for the most impactful impact or reaching out of the preschoolers. Just want to conclude very briefly that the Pediatric Praziquantel Consortium has already achieved a number of the critical elements to reach access of the targeted population. However, again, my plea to this community is let's look at and prioritize what is the most critical element here, and that is the financing mechanism to support countries for purchasing of those upcoming commodities, and this is not just about the pediatric praziquantel. With this, I'd like to thank the consortium members, and last and not the least, EDCTP for their trust over all those years and their funding support. Thank you much.
I'd like to congratulate the consortium. I mean, that you're talking about this upfront and not waiting until when the product is ready. Thank you so much. And do we have any questions? At the back, please, yes.
Thank you. I'm Iyasu from Addis Ababa University, Ethiopia. And thank you for the exciting information which you have transpired. My concern is the lengthy process which it might take for registration by local drug authority. Because still, these children are suffering from this disease. I wonder how long it will take in order to come to reach to the target population. The other question is, which dosage form do you think is going to be available? Because if you make it tablet, again, there will be a problem, obviously, because you have to crush it, you have to dissolve it in water, and then maybe the active components might not reach the target population. So is it going to be a syrup, or in the form of liquid preparation, or any other form? Thank you.
Okay. So the first element about registration, indeed, we hear you loud and clear. These local registrations can be extremely lengthy. So that's why also we're considering with various stakeholders on applying more rather for a collaborative registration procedure, because having worked with WHO and WHO being an observer to the EMA procedure, this is going to allow for a CRP type of approach. But before even this, I think what we are also trying to engage in conversation are there any other alternative path via UN-based type of approach for an early access, while conversations with countries who want to register will be prepared to do so. So this is for the registration topic. Then for the second aspect, which is the presentation of the product, if I understood correctly the question, this is actually a small tablet. It's a dispersible tablet in water. So very easy to use, in fact.
The last question, please. Thank you.
Congratulations, Beatrice, and the consortium for having come this far. My name is Cecilia O from the UNDP. Well, just to say that we manage what is called the Access and Delivery Partnership, and obviously very interested to work with the consortium to look at how we can fast-track access and delivery of pediatric praziquantel. But perhaps, two questions. I think you've already mentioned this idea of national regulatory approvals and potentially looking at alternatives. I would also caution looking at sort of the UN approaches for, sort of the waivers as we go, because I think if we are looking at a scientific opinion from EMA early next year, we should be able to kickstart the national regulatory processes as quickly as possible. But I agree that perhaps having two parallel systems might be the way to go if we want to increase the number of countries. But then going forward, and this is my second question, maybe looking further ahead, in terms of sustainability and in terms of, I guess, security of supply, when I think you showed the plan of working with domestic manufacturers. I think that's a brilliant idea. But I also thought maybe in terms of further looking at the sustainability issue, if we're looking at the production of pediatric praziquantel, what happens to the production of praziquantel if we're moving from, as you say, a situation where we're looking at less donations and more procurement, whichever form that takes? Are we also looking at perhaps transferring the production of praziquantel, to many more sort of regional and national manufacturers? I think this is possibly, sort of a longer-term look at sustainability. And then I think maybe in addition to that, I know we're looking at very much at prevention, sort of chemo prevention, mass drug administration, but also wondering whether or not there is a need to look at a number of tools, just in terms of the overall care and treatment of, related to schisto. And do we need to look at, sort of other tools such as diagnostics? I mean, I think that question came up in our session earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. I thought it was one question, but and a short one. Okay. So from a registration perspective, again, totally agreeing with you. It's rather clear that what would be a logical path is to accelerate registration locally. However, and we can have conversation on this, it's rather clear that registering in countries where the countries may not be ready from both an implementation perspective and a financial perspective to really onboard the product can be a risk. So we need to have this dialogue. Instead of jumping right away and saying, okay, we are going to go for wide registration aspect, I think we need to have a very thorough conversation with countries, identifying maybe early adopter countries that are ready to get really in the game and make this a reality. So this is one point. The second was about, I think, manufacturing and manufacturing of potentially also praziquantel. So I will invite you to join us at Merck, because we're having conversation about actually sustainability and access of the praziquantel-like products. So you're more than welcome to join us and to challenge us on this one. Having said that, I want to be very clear, there is no discussion about stepping out of the donation. This is a commitment of Merck to WHO and to the community. There's a commitment of 250 million tablets per year. We are not changing our words. Last point about diagnostic. You're absolutely right. We are engaged with a number of diagnostic developers also, because Merck is engaged, and here I'm talking more on, from the company perspective and not from the pediatric praziquantel perspective. But the company is very much engaged to support elimination of the elimination agenda. For that, it requires diagnostic. It requires access to water. It requires about training and so on. If we manage to debug that access path for the pediatric praziquantel, then this is the door opening also for other NTD commodities, diagnostic including.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beatrice.
Thank you. So I'd now invite Maggie Heinz to come up, and Maggie is from the UK Collaborative on Development Research, and she'll be presenting on the UK CDR Enhancing Coherence, Collaboration and Joint Action in the UK Research Funding Landscape and Beyond. Can you find it okay?
Yeah. Here we go. Good morning, everybody. My name is Maggie Heinz. I'm Executive Director of UK CDR, which, as Lara spelled it out, is a collaborative on development research. So I'm going to take you now on a different journey, mostly a discipline agnostic journey. We have done some work in the area of health research, but we are looking at international development research as a whole. In the call for abstract for this symposium, there was an interest in looking into coherence and collaboration and also equitable partnership. And I thought that was actually quite fitting with the work that UKCDR has been doing over the years. And I was also very glad to see our logo on the first presentation, so I think it fits in very nicely. So I've structured my talk in two different sections. The first one is looking at coherence and collaboration in terms of funding in the UK. And then I'm going to drill down into some aspect of work we've done and finish on the equitable partnership section of our work. So for those of you who are not familiar with UKCDR, what we are and what we do, we are a very small organization which vision is to enhance, to accelerate global development through the power of research and knowledge. And our mission is to amplify the value and impact of research by promoting coherence, collaboration, and joint action among UK research funders. I'm not going to go into the details of the governance, but we are a small impartial organization, and our governing body comprises 4 government departments and the Wellcome Trust. They are listed at the bottom of the slide. So we are working very closely with the Department of Health and Social Care, with the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, with the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, UKRI and UK Research and Innovation, and the Wellcome Trust. So they are our funders. They sit on our board, and we've got representation from chief scientific advisors and at director level. So how do we ensure coherence and coordination amongst the funders of development research? We do that by providing them with data, tools, but also good practice to support their evidence-informed decision-making processes and to support coordination and, above all, avoid duplication of efforts and funding. So we have 3 main areas of work to achieve our goals: mapping, convening, and sharing information. And all of that with the overall idea to bridging the gap between what research is funded and how research is conducted. So I'm going to take you briefly through those 3 areas of work to give you a bit of an understanding of how we are achieving coherence and coordination. I'm going to start with the most straightforward one, convening. As an organization, we've got a range of funder groups or impartial fora where joint or complementary research investment has a potential to increase impact for developing countries. So we gather the funders into 5 different areas of research for international development: research capacity strengthening, epidemics preparedness, health, disaster research, and communication. In terms of the mapping we do, and I'm going to give an example in the area of health research, when the COVID pandemic started, UKCDR, together with Glopidar, were very quick to set up the COVID Circle, which was an initiative aimed at aligning research funders to build a coherent effort for supporting COVID-19 research in, for, and with low and middle income countries. As part of this initiative, we endeavored to align funders to a set of principles for effective funding in epidemics and pandemics. We established a world-class tracker for funded COVID-19 research projects. We produced quarterly living mapping review to give a status of where research was going. And we also established a community of researchers in LMIC. In terms of the tracker that I mentioned, over the few years that the COVID pandemic, since the COVID pandemic started, we have mapped over 20,000 projects representing at least $8.5 billion of funding awarded by 377 funders and for research taking place across 163 countries. All this mapping that is done is mapped against a framework or research priority, like the WHO research priority, for instance, to highlight to funders the areas where there is duplication of research or areas where we could focus more research funding on. So it's highlighting the gaps that would benefit from more coordination. All of that can be found on our website, and it's a rather straightforward tool to use. You've got a map of the world, and you can look in different areas to see what research is being funded in that part of the world. The COVID tracker has been a huge success, and we are now continuing the work with Glopidar to establish another tool looking this time at a pandemic. So we are transitioning the work from COVID-19 to a broader range of epidemic-prone disease. Why? Again, to inform effective funding decision-making and to support coordination of research preparedness and research responses during new epidemics and pandemics. So we are working along the line of the WHO priority disease list to look at including data on the range of disease that is listed at the bottom of this slide. The mapping takes a broader turn also because we are interested in mapping ODA research and innovation as a whole, and this time is very much discipline agnostic, but it's again with the idea of giving our funders an idea of where funding for international development research and ODA funding goes. So we do have a tool which is again very straightforward, a map of the world, showcasing a listing of all live projects currently funded by our funders to give an idea again of where the money is going, which country, in which area of interest. And the reason for doing that is to ensure that we have a response to the need for stakeholders to be able to access more joint up and complete information on the UK ODA funded research and innovation activity. So that's accessible to anyone. And last but not least, in terms of mapping, we've been looking at research funding flows and where the money from UK ODA research and innovation goes. And we've done some specific country reports in the past, looking specifically at investment in Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. And upcoming, and based on the success of the COVID-19 tracker and the Pandemic Pact tool, we are in the process of developing a proof of concept for a climate research tracker. Our interest being very much international development research. We are looking at projects funded in the area of climate change and international development. I understand this is a huge undertaking. With COVID, we had a T0, where we could start tracking. Climate is a bit different, but that's why we've embarked on a proof of concept to see where that leads us to. And the third section is in the area of best practice and sharing information with our funders and the broader community. So in that area, we've got the 4 approaches to supporting equitable research partnership that Lara mentioned too. But we've been doing a range of work looking at research capacity strengthening, looking at the lessons learned from ODA research in the UK and the large funding programs that were launched, and what have we learned from such large investment. And the reason is to support the development of a transdisciplinary ecosystem for development research that is evidence-based. We also have a range of resource hub, again, available on our website for the entire community, funders and researchers alike. And we've done work in the past in the area of safeguarding, research capacity strengthening, and we also have our hub on equitable research partnerships. And that's where I want to go now, and I want to elaborate a bit on the work that we've done on equity in research partnership over the past 3 years. So that's a drawing that I often show, and often people are very receptive to that. When we started the project, we had a survey that was conducted and we received a lot of responses, and the questions asked were in terms of what is inhibiting equity in research partnership between the North and the South, and what do you perceive as the factors that could enable equity. And as you can see from that tree, we do have a range of responses. So on the left, in the dying side of the trees, that's all the factors that are perceived as inhibiting equity: exclusion, lack of resources, misunderstanding, doubt. On the right-hand side, for a flourishing tree and all the factors that would enable equity in research partnership to flourish, we do have creativity, a shift of resource, skills exchange, new opportunity. So the best practice document that we established in collaboration with Essence on Health, I don't know if Gary is in the room, but we published that together between UKCDR and Essence on Health, is by no means a Bible of equitable research partnership. I'm very aware that there is a range of documentation, lots of initiatives that exist. But in terms of the highlight of this document, I just wanted to flag that, it was not just developed by a UK-centric consortium. It was very much developed by a task force of global research funders. I used to have a slide listing all the partners from Africa. I don't have it here, but it was very much an international endeavor. It contains 4 interconnected approaches to supporting equitable research partnership, looking very much from the overall research ecosystem and drilling down to what I refer to as a nitty-gritty of actually implementing equity in research partnership. And it also provides practical recommendation at 3 different levels, at the research funders, at the institutional level, but also at the level of the research teams. And last but not least, we do have a range of case study, and EDCTP is one of those case studies that highlights how we can actually achieve equity in research partnerships. The process behind the creation of this document was a global survey with over 400 responses, the formation of 5 consultative groups, review of existing literature, and the development of a case study. Each time I speak about this initiative, I want to flag that the best practice document itself has been translated in French, not only because I'm French, as I like to say, but because I don't think we can discuss equity in research partnership with stakeholders in Africa just discussing it in English. So I take the point about language. We also need to address Lusophone country and Spanish-speaking country, but I thought let's start with French, see how we can disseminate. Let's see at the level of engagement we have, and let's take it from that. Just to show you very briefly what it looks like inside in terms of its practicality, you basically have, it's almost like a menu per different approaches. You've got a set of recommendations, and we highlight whether the recommendation applies for the funders, for the research institution, or for the researchers. So we've had feedback from a range of people having used this documentation and referring to the fact that it was almost like a menu, and you can do a plan of action and look at what you need to take into consideration to develop your grant proposal. And now I'm going to take you briefly through the 4 different approaches, just to give you an idea of the type of recommendation that is in there. And as I mentioned, starting from the research partnership ecosystem at the highest level, the first thing to bear in mind is the value mindset, so how much we value the importance of equity in research partnership. And then it's about taking a holistic approach to equity, and that starts through the start of the funding of the life cycle of the project, from the agenda setting period to funding decision, to management and leadership, outputs and impacts. And it is about being aware and addressing power imbalances, allowing for LMIC leadership and ownership, institutional relationship building, but also ensuring greater involvement in LMIC institution in policy and decision-making processes. And above all, it's also making sure that there is long-term sustainability that is taken into consideration. If we go down one level, so moving from the overall research ecosystem to strengthening research relationship and research system, one of the things that I don't think we highlight strongly enough often is that it is a two-way learning system. So it is not one-sided. We are explaining to people how to do it. It's very much everybody has to learn, and it has to be two-way. The knowledge of context is key. And in terms of building mutual understanding of context, working with governments, funders, research communities in LMIC, and also valuing local knowledge. In terms of strengthening research relationship, it's all about the co-element. It has to be co-designed, it has to be co-created and co-delivered. In terms of enhancing capacity, we have to be holistic again and think at the individual, institutional, and ecosystem level. And here, very much last but not least, I've worked as a research manager for 8 years in a higher education institution in the UK, and the support that the research management function provide to PI is absolutely crucial. And I'm very mindful that there is a huge inequity here with partners in LMIC who don't have that research management support. So I think investment in research management is a crucial aspect of addressing power imbalances in research. Budget for partnership building, it's also a crucial point to consider in terms of supporting the partnership development itself and the co-design of the research project. And that can take different forms, from seed funding, pump priming, involvement of research manager, staff exchange, I'm almost there, Lara, and also thinking beyond the project itself in terms of follow-on funding and promotion of transdisciplinarity. And also, as has been mentioned before, to consider direct funding to LMIC institution and researchers. And the last point here, and that becomes very much the nitty-gritty, developing research proposal can be complex enough in a UK context in terms of due diligence, costing, intellectual property consideration, ethical review. So we just have to make sure that the terms of reference are understandable with the partners that we work with and are also adapted to the context. And I'm just going to finish with, we've been engaging a lot on this topic, and we've had a range of engagement, be it presentation like this, also workshop. And we conducted a workshop at Cambridge where we had a range of researchers, but also the research managers were in the room. And I think the dynamic, when you do have the PI, when you do have the researchers and the research support function in the same room, was very much something to look into, because they all come from different sides of the same problem. So I think working together is also something that will help addressing those inequities. Sorry for being too long.
Thank you, Maggie. And I recognize this artist from another conference, actually. It's very good, yeah. So I don't know, we have a few minutes for questions. I see a hand here.
My name is Mercury Shitindo, current chair for Africa Bioethics Network. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question for you.
Oh, your mic's not working.
I go on? Okay. Oh, I have a question for you, and I'm suspecting my question will also be a question for the others. I have not seen the space for bioethics in the presentation you have given, and this is also largely missing in other presentations. And the reason why I'm asking this is when people think of bioethics, they think of it only as ethical committees, ethical review, as you have mentioned. Much more than that, and would be able to reduce the inequities, injustice in our systems in the long run. So if this is something that can be given consideration at the beginning of when you're strategizing, planning ahead, then it can be able to reduce a lot of issues, inequities in the long term. Thank you.
So I don't know if it was really a question, but all I can say is what I presented is, as I mentioned at the start, is discipline agnostic. So it's more a set of principles that have to be taken into account from the onset. And I think bioethics is something that within the bullet point of ethical review is something that has to be considered and adapted based on the project. But I think, other people more in the health sector might be better to address that.
So I'm afraid we're a bit limited on time. I did have one quick clarification question, or maybe just to explain to people for the Pandemic Pact. Can you just clarify that's going to be for capturing beyond UK funders, right? The investments,
Yes. And we're coming towards having a something that is going to be usable. So it's moving along nicely.
We had to, it'd be interesting, Val and I were talking last night with Jonathan about this, and we were thinking it might be useful to also bear in mind how you could potentially in that capture the clinical trials that are planned, so that upfront researchers can already see before they submit applications what's in the planning, what's potentially already being funded, so that there's no kind of overlaps. And I don't know, Val, whether you want to say anything on that too, very briefly before we...
Thanks, Maggie, and thanks, Lara. Yeah, and just to say that the aim, as Maggie said, absolutely is to transition what was the COVID tracker to an international pandemic tracker. And that's being now transitioned, as Maggie said, to the GLOPIDAR Secretariat. So GLOPIDAR is the international funders group, so hopefully many of your funders, your organizations are represented there. There's about 35 different international funding agencies. And so the Pandemic Pact database is going to be kind of hosted and managed internationally, moving away from the UK CDR side. And absolutely, that came up as an interesting question last night about how things that have just been funded as trials, for example, can be more visible to people so that you know what's actually just been funded rather than only knowing maybe about the research once it's come through. So I think that is definitely something that Maggie doesn't know about yet. So, but I think it'll be one for the GLOPIDAR Secretariat, who are now picking up the Pandemic Pact, which is, a different kind of, it'll be a different project going forward. But I think that's a really interesting question that many people here already this morning have already been talking about, Lara. So thanks very much for the opportunity to say something about that. Jonathan, can I pass the mic to Jonathan?
Well, I think we maybe need to move on. We've only got 15 minutes left. Sorry, pal. I'm sorry to put you on the spot there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And it's my pleasure to introduce the last speaker for the session, Rafina Raffinato, again from Belgium. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm waiting for the presentation. I don't know if somebody can upload it. Okay. Thank you. So it's a little bit of a challenge to be the last speaker in the session before lunch, but I will try to do my best not to be too long. And to some extent, my presentation links to the first one of the colleague from the London School, because we are talking about equitable partnerships and equitable access and partnerships as a key to equitable access. And in fact, the overarching idea is that here we are at the EDCTP forum, where most of us are doing clinical research, part of a research and development plan. And the idea is not only to deliver a new medicines, a new vaccine, but to make it available, affordable, acceptable, and quality assured for everybody who is in need. And what we have seen with the COVID pandemic is that the research and development plan can be incredibly quick if it is adequately supported by funders and by scientists, but then there was a gap. The quickly developed vaccine were not really available timely to all those in need. And these experiences, in fact, not new to COVID. Those who are old enough to remember what happened in the last 20 years will remember perfectly similar situation in HIV, access for antiretrovirals, in hepatitis C. Yeah, we build measures to give access and to scale up treatment, but it takes too long. And meanwhile, there are lives which are lost while we are trying post-hoc to build access to new medicines and vaccine. And it's not only about access, it's also about quality assurance. We are developing new medicines vaccine with the EDCTP funding, and we would like to have them always available also as multi-source medicines in quality assured versions. And we know that in countries with weak regulation, according to WHO, about 10% of medicines are either substandard or falsified. So these are all things we should think upfront when we write our protocol, when we write our research plan. okay, we write the protocol, the study design, the ethics, that's wonderful, but we should start engaging at that moment with the regulators and the ethics committee. We should start thinking at that moment, once we have the products, how will we share technology, having in mind the environment of intellectual property around us. If it is about local R&D and local production, we should start thinking upfront about which are the market dynamics. There will be a market demand. Are the supply system ready? Will there be hesitancies of mistrust about this product? Can we engage with the community now? All things which are quite obvious, but the message here, unless we think of this upfront before starting our research, clinical research plan, then we will be running behind time and will end up in the HIV or COVID situation. Great products, but it takes years to make them available for all. Here, I would especially make the case of pharmacovigilance because it's where we are working now, so I would like to share a specific experience and plans about how to incorporate the specific aspect of pharmacovigilance in the overall R&D undertaking. Just to agree on definition, the World Health Organization defines vigilance as science of activity related to the detection and assessment, but also understanding and prevention of adverse drug reaction of any medicines-related product. It's very important in our clinical research plan, but it is also more important perhaps once we bring our new product to the real life condition, to detect new signal, new safety signals that were not captured during the clinical trials and prevent mortality and morbidity related to the safety profile. But also, and again, another COVID lessons, to be able to communicate to the communities and to the policymakers about these safety problems. It may be very, very difficult. We have a rare side effect, but it is very serious when it happens. What should the Ministry of Health do? To what extent should the community be worried? And often we don't have the capacity to communicate there. And all this becomes even more important when we have a public health emergency of international concern, because there, like in COVID, again, we are deploying product without having completed the ideal research and development plan. So we must be particularly careful in catching up new safety signals that could not be seen in this preliminary research plan. When we come to the people working in collaborative research, we have also other important reasons to strengthen pharmacovigilance systems while carrying out research. In fact, the safety of a product, in addition to what is identified during the development plan, also depends on the genetic characteristic, of the general health status of a population, and the characteristic of the health system which serves this population. Just a recent research of our group shows that there are basically no industry-sponsored clinical trials carried out in oncology in low-income countries. So if these new innovative medicines for oncology comes in low-income countries, we have absolutely no safety data from these contexts. That's the pharmacovigilance system locally which should get them. Then we have other systems. If the pharmacovigilance system is able to detect substandard and falsified medicines on the field, well, we could avoid a lot of death by withdrawing a dangerous batch timely. When we are planning local research and development, a good pharmacovigilance system at the onset can help to protect safety, but also to avoid misinformation, hesitancy, mistrust. And then, detecting rapidly safety issues which are not due to the safety profile but of the product, but to medication errors, to systematic irrational use. And recently there is also something which I think is very important, even not that much known. There are ideas to develop ecopharmacovigilance as a component of pharmacovigilance to detect and prevent the bad effect of medicines waste in the soil, in surface water as a result of poor waste management, poor manufacturing practices. So there is really a lot to do there. We have a partnership, the Institute of Tropical Medicine in Belgium and the University of the Western Cape in South Africa, a partnership which was initially prompted to link public health and pharmacy. And so we initially started by developing education programs in pharmaceutical public health, access to medicines, quality of medicines, etc. Also creating a kind of alumni community where people can network, partners, and exchange experience. This, we realized that, education should be somehow related to research and vice versa. So it is the South African partners, which is represented by Dr. Hazel Bradley here in the room, which took the lead on an EDCTP funded program on pharmacovigilance to strengthen pharmacovigilance and regulatory capacity in Zimbabwe, South Africa, Eswatini, and Namibia. You see that the Institute of Tropical Medicine disappeared there. We are helping from outside, but this is a full project, African project with South-South learning across different institutions. And one of the things that I heard from the participants in this project, it was exciting for most of them to have this space to come together and to learn from each other's experience and to share data. And this is really something, as a researchers or regulators, we cannot, perhaps we don't realize it. We are used to being invited at conferences to exchange. Pharmacovigilance people are traditionally left a little bit in the corner. There is not that much space to create partnerships across peers. So this EDCTP funding was really great to give this opportunity. And based on that experience, here I'm sharing some plans. We are writing a new proposal to be hopefully funded by the European Community and EDCTP. We would like first to extend the network. So University of Western Cape with the initial group has built some capacities in pharmacovigilance. So this platform could not be extended. We have been discussing with colleagues from Mozambique, from Botswana, potentially from Lesotho, to have more people on board. And this really would like to improve and connect the partnership. So working on training, but it may be an experience of many people in the room. A short course, even if it's a 3-week short course, give you the basis, but you don't really know how much it changed the practices. So we would like to have a consortium which build an initial training to mobility scheme, to mentoring schemes, to PhD research, to create a community of people who works together, who are not just theoretically trained together. We would like to link that to research. Pharmacovigilance programs are traditionally underfunded, and many, especially in small countries, have a lot of data from notification which are somewhere in a cupboard or in a computer, but there were no resources to analyze them and to learn from that. So we would like to have a partnership where you don't have only the pharmacovigilance officer of the regulators, but also the academics, the researchers who can help these people in pharmacovigilance groups to learn from this data and potentially also to change practices, to get these research results into policies and practices. And we also need other people in this partnership, particularly communication people. All this information which is generated by pharmacovigilance often is not exploited enough. We should exploit it to share independent analysis, independent information about safety, but also to learn how to communicate to communities and to the policymakers. We have seen, again, the example of COVID pandemic is perhaps a little bit too easy, but some vaccine really went out of the market in Europe very quickly because of fears about safety, which were not clearly understood and explained by the community, but also by high-level people who had to decide about policy. So the idea is to put all these things together and according to fair partnership. Here, it has been described very well what a fair partnership is in the first intervention, so I do not have to go back to that. I just would like to underline and remind that EDCTP is one of the first signatories who endorsed the Trust Code for Global Code of Conduct for Equitable Research Partnerships. And here, in this code, in this short code, there are really clear and important tips about to be equitable in our partnerships, from avoiding ethics dumping to something which I consider very important, to include in the partnership the field researchers. As an ethical reviewer, I often see protocols where we name a lot of people and then it is written, and some people will do the data collection in the field. And these are often those who are exposed to security risks, to psychological stress. They do not even have the honor of having their name written somewhere. So this code helps us to go back to some important ethics issues which may be forgot. To conclude, 12 minutes are very short, but I think the message here, based on the pharmacovigilance plans that we have, is to say partnership wants to give equitable access to everybody, and to do this, fantastic scientists are not enough. High-quality clinical trial sites are not enough. You need to engage with a number of other people from the start if we want that our mission, which is not to develop medicines, but to bring it to the last mile for everybody, is accomplished. 12:30, I did my best.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Rafaela. Thank you very much. I think time is time to end this, and I should like to thank the speakers, excellent speakers. Thank you that you spoke within the time. We have to go for lunch now. Thank you for this. Do you really want to have one question? Okay, I just didn't want to hold you back from your lunch. Okay, can we have one question then?
Is there someone?
Please, at the back. Yes, Beatty.
Thank you. Thank you, Rafaela.
Can you? I thought we were hungry.
One question, no?
Thanks, Rafaela. That's a really important contribution. I wondered why you're restricting your efforts to Southern Africa, because a lot of the weak regulatory authorities are actually also in West Africa, where I happen to work. And I wonder whether there's a bigger scheme of things. And also, my idea is that actually the stronger regulatory authorities in Africa could partner the weaker ones. Are there any sort of equitable issues around that you could explore on a little bit? Thank you.
I think it's an excellent point. In fact, the idea to work on the initial 2 or 3 years period with partners in Southern Africa is a little bit opportunistic, because we have an enthusiastic network, a core network, which is there. But indeed, if we can have a middle or long-term perspective, we are already thinking of the Lusophone countries by having Mozambique on board in the first period. And then we have a very good other network in West Africa, particularly with DRC and with Burkina Faso. So in a second phase, we could translate and create another parallel network. We have been thinking how, and it's something which came already out before, how we deal with this linguistical diversity. The idea would probably to have a French-speaking network which build on the experience of the English-speaking network and works somehow in parallel. But this is absolutely important.
Okay. So is that okay? Can we go now? So thank you so much for your patience and for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you for the closing ceremony at 2 p.m.